Okay, so I'm back again with Luis Ramos. What I want to ask you, what's your take on the Taino movement then and now? What's your take on it?
Well, there's one thing I remember. Back in '94, I became 94, 95, I became a member of the Taino Nation. Here's my tribal card right here that I still carry, signed by Rene. And one thing that we used to do back then, when I was with the Nation, and what I still see now, is this desire to learn the language, desire to create regalia, to be a symbol for people who still don't learn, or haven't learned about our culture. And I think that's very, very important that we continue that tradition. I remember in the 90s, it was very exciting and adrenaline rush, and giving presentations to the different schools, you know, to the different, even to the powwows, dancing as a Taino. And, you know, it still happens now. You know, a lot of Tainos go to the powwows to learn about their culture. There's one thing that I see in powwows that I used to see more back in the day, is more Taino representation, a sense of, you know, having a table or you know, the teachings and so on. So I think that needs to generate more, the visible level, you know. But, you know, past, present, this restoration movement here in New York, different states, United States, back in the islands, definitely it's all about passion to teach, and not mostly tribal affiliation, even though we're getting there a lot, you know. But what I find is the past present is the whole sense of who we are, that we still exist. And right now I see, like in Hiwayagua, I see a major push towards, you know, identifying yourself with Taino identity in a group setting, you know. We call Yukayeke. And I find that people like Jorge Estevez, who's making a link between the islanders who never stopped being Taino, you know, there wasn't a break, bringing their knowledge to us here in the city or in the United States, very important. And Hiwayagua is doing that. It's a bridge. We're making a connection between the islanders and people in the diaspora. That, I believe, that's the next level. You know, that's the next level. And hopefully we could be a tribe, you know, an official tribe. But we have to go back to the people who never stopped living a Taino way. Thank you.
Oh, that's very powerful. Thanks again.
Thank you.
This is Raw Live. I'm here with Rene, and we're here in front of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And we're coming here today to pay tribute and respect to our ancestors' Taino artifacts, and we're going to be discussing the legacy of the Taino diaspora in the present among our communities. So with that, you know, I want to express, you know, there's a lot of misrepresentation of our culture, you know, and especially through education. You know, the educational system, they express, oh, you know, the Tainos are dead, you know, the culture is gone, you know, we're long gone and extinct, you know, and what we're here today is to express and know that, you know, these elements are not gone, they are still present, and we, representing our community, we are here to educate the youth as well as our elders that, you know, our, you know, sacred tradition is still here.
Mm-hmm. And also like, for example, in certain education systems, like in schools, they only teach the Native Americans that are present in the United States, but a lot of people don't know that there were Native people, indigenous people in the Caribbean. Right. You know, I give you an example. When I went to the public school with Louis to do a presentation to the public school, I had a lady. She said to me, "You're Taino." I said, "I'm not." Are you? She says, "Are you in the Taino tribe?" I said, "No, ma'am, I'm in no tribe, but I am part Taino." And right away she says, "Oh, what part of Mexico is that from?" You know. Now, in my mind, that's a good example that a lot of people don't know that there were indigenous people in the Caribbean.
That's right.
We're called Tainos, and we were the first to be called Indians before anybody. We were the first to be decimated, you know, and killed by the Europeans. So this is a great way to show people that, and to teach people that they were indigenous people in the Caribbean, and that our presence is still there as well.
Right. So what we're doing today, it's an attempt to just to go over, these misrepresentations, such as like in the diaspora in the Caribbean islands, we have these spiritual practices that are still present, that our people, celebrate under an umbrella such as Christianity.
Right, yeah.
Just as to use as an example, as we have Moorish brothers in the community here in the States, as they use Islam as a tool to navigate through the system. So it's similar just as over there, because we're dealing with the psychology that, when a people is forced not to openly practice their culture, they have to look for other, alternatives.
Exactly. And another thing with Catholicism and Taino practices too in the Caribbean, especially Africans, when the Tainos and Africans had to be converted to Christianity, Catholicism, they weren't allowed to practice their tradition.
Right, that's right.
So what they would do is they would practice their tradition on a low key when the Europeans weren't around or the priests weren't watching them. So this is a great example that some of the Taino tradition is actually blended with Catholicism and Christianity. It's just that certain people don't know. And this is a good way to show people as well, and to let them know that some way and somehow they are practicing the Taino tradition. They just don't know it. It's incognito there. You just gotta put the differences. Like for example, if you go to Catholicism, I've never seen a Christian or European descent who will put acanfor in the water and put it by the door to put away bad spirits.
Right.
We do that.
That's right.
So that's another example that that's actually, I believe that's an indigenous practice right there, because the water is very sacred.
Right. Yeah, just like you were saying when we were walking over here to the museum. For one, our brothers and sisters, they still pray to the yucca, they still pray to the water, and they still pray to the ancestors. So all of these things are still relevant. For example, these are things that our elders in the Smithsonian, like such as Jorge Estevez, Tureiyari, the Taino Legacies Project, and the work that they're currently doing, with bringing this information out. So today what we're gonna do is we're gonna have a little fun, and we're going to just share some knowledge and show you what's still relevant.
Exactly, and it's another thing that I know a lot of people, they think that we only concentrating on Tainos, knowing that we also have African ancestry and we have European ancestry. But just to clear that up, the reason that we concentrate on Taino, our Taino ancestry, is because when you go to Puerto Rico, when you go to Dominican Republic, and you go to Cuba, you can see the African presence there. You can see the black people from Afro-Puerto Rican or Afro-Cubano and Afro-Dominicans. You can see it. You can see the Europeans. You can see the people who are light-skinned. And you can see Tainos.
Right.
But when you ask a person who has Taino features, they ask them, who are you? They're going to say, I'm Spanish. You understand? And you can see the presence, but when you say Taino, it's like people don't know who they are. It's like because they know in history, in the books, in school, that they're gone.
Right.
So this is a good way of doing that.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Just to make a last comment, what we're seeing is a disconnection with our culture.
Exactly.
You understand? When you look at the impacts historically of colonialism, what happened is the backbone, which is the spirituality, the root of the culture, is taken away. That's what we see today with people living in the projects, just going to school, chasing careers without having a connection to a cause, without which they would say this romanticized expression of having a connection with God, so to speak. So these are many of the realities that we have to face today, and trying and attempt to reclaim what was stolen from us. These are the challenges these are some of the many challenges that we have to go through.
That's right. All right. And another thing before we go too, usually I ask family members of mine or friends who are religious, and I ask them, do you know why you're a Catholic? Do you know why you're a Christianity? Remember, your ancestor or your great-great-grandparents were converted, and some of them were even killed if they weren't to convert to Christianity. So also you got to keep that in mind, that you were converted by force and I don't know the word by head right now, but just think about it and ask yourself, how come I'm Catholic? How come I'm Christianity? Somewhere down the line, some of your family members were murdered and decimated if they weren't to convert to Christianity or any type of religion that you are right now. It could be Christian or Catholic, for example, you know. But just to put it out there.
All right, so with that, let's go inside and let's see what they have going on. All right, let's go. All right, so we are. I'm here with Luis Ramos, and what we want to talk about here is an introduction on Pane and the Taino Chronicles.
Okay. Well, I just want to mention that Ramon Pane was a friar in the Jerome brothers order, and a lot of people say he was a priest. A lot of history says he was a lay brother. But there's one thing that's for sure, is that Christopher Columbus commissioned him to document our culture, the Taino culture, both the religion, the myth stories, basically trying to get to the psychology of the Taino in the 1400s, late 1400s, 1500s. It was a perfect strategy to learn and to conquer. There's one thing I do want to tell people, that Ramon Pane was not very fluent in the what we call the classic Taino language. There's some history that states that he knew the Macori dialect of the Dominican Republic, Liciaga, but really he did not command the language. I learned this many years ago. I won't get into it too much now, but Ramon Pane, he had a translator, and he was a cacique Guatibaba. He was his official translator. And there's a lot of evidence that states that, Guatibaba was the one who actually translated from Taino to Spanish the myth stories, our sacred stories, our thinking. Unfortunately, he was killed by some other caciques. One reason I basically understand why they did it was because Guatibaba was baptized into the Catholic religion, and he became Juan Mateo. And his family, his Irka also became Catholic, and they were killed as well. And you can just imagine, the Catholic Church at the time was brutal. The conquest, also cultural clashes religiously. But Juan Mateo, or Cacique Guatibaba, when Pope John Paul II went to the Dominican Republic to celebrate 500 years of evangelization, he recognized Cacique Guatibaba by name. And he said he was the first Christian indigenous martyr for the faith. My personal opinion is more to it than we know, and it needs to be taught. It needs to be investigated first.
All right.
It must be done by us.
Yeah, so I'm here in the Metropolitan Museum with Rene. We're checking out more relics. See Taino pendants.
Cajola spoon, right here.
Yeah.
This is a cajola spoon.
Just you can imagine the power, within, these sacred pieces, that they have locked away, and it's all representing our stuff.
And just by watching these, it's like you watching what your ancestors used to use.
Yeah. paying tribute to our ancestors here. Yeah, you were saying something about the bate or the represent with the snakes. Yeah.
Yeah, the snake possibility represents fertility or reborn, considering the snake sheds the skin. And also the snake can represent the umbilical cord. That's what I said, fertility and reborn. Transformation or reborn.
Right.
But it's just a theory.
It's interesting also because in Pane's account, he says that, the Behikes were protected by snakes. So I also see that's very symbolic.
That's interesting.
So let's do it this way. Yeah, so we're commenting, there's only so much that, they can cover. Like there's so much that we have that's part of our culture. But enough is not represented,
Yeah, you can see that they only have so much, very little amount of artifacts collected by them, but in my books, there's a lot, but they just don't have them in museums, but they have a lot of Mayan and Aztecs.
Yeah, I mean, and with that said, just like we were talking about outside about the misrepresentation, there's not enough representation of our culture. And what our elders are doing with the Taino Legacies Project, is really important what they're doing, A lot of our people don't understand the sacrifice that they're doing, putting all of this, together.
I just had a theory, 1 second. This belt, if you look at it really clear, I think I know why they would use it. It represents the woman's womb. And when you put it on, you understand? If you look at it really clear, that's what I meant by reborn, rebirth.
Right.
3-point semi.
Right.
You see the mouth of the Supreme Being. I think this mouth will represent that he will clean the soil in the dirt so that the yucca can grow.
And what's funny is they still practice that in the island, so that's pretty deep.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
That's what the mouth is for.
For someone to say that our culture is dead, it's really an injustice.
Interesting.
Just standing here, like you can see the presence. We're still here. So. And going back through time.
So they weren't allowed to sit in dirt.
Right.
So that's what they would let them sit in the dirt.
Right.
It's interesting to see that this duval, it looks like a turtle, right?
Yeah, it does. Very.
The carey.
Right.
Interesting. And then I always wonder, why would they use the turtle for them to sit on? It's very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, these are things that, like, if you ask me, in my opinion, like, now, like, we're starting to come into an understanding of what, these things represented to our ancestors. So I guess as the time goes on, as the information comes out, like, we'll start to have more of a grounding of what, these expressions represented, to our ancestors and as how it connects to us in the present, as we're trying to, reconnect with our culture,
What's interesting too is that it's possible maybe the turtle represents fertility too because of the moon.
Right, that's right.
The moon represents menstrual. Right. And I was hearing that they would count the days of the woman's menstrual by using the moon in the turtle's shell.
Right, that's right.
So it's interesting.
Definitely.
So it could be, I'm not sure if the women used to sit on it, but
Yeah, it can be a possibility. I mean, in my opinion, like these are things that we need to explore. All right, peace. I'm here with Rene, and we're having a discussion here about the language. So before we get into the language, I want to ask you: is there someone, an elder in the community that inspired you or gave you an interest to further study into the relationships that you find with the words?
I don't have like an elder or anybody to inspire me. I think that there was a page. I think it was Revitalization of the Language on Facebook, and I saw that people were referencing the languages or whatever Taino word of the day. I was like, oh, this is interesting. I like this. So that kind of gave me the inspiration to search words. And in my opinion, I believe that, like the French guy, I think he said this. I think his name was Jack Derrida. He said that with language, if you trace the languages, you can have a better perception of the world and how everything has a connection to it. And I think that language, if you do the same thing with language, you can connect. You can make the connections, and that's just my opinion. That's the same. That's my.
I can see what you're saying. What you're saying there, because from my understanding, just from archaeology, with the language, and this is me expressing my opinion on this. It's gonna help us to see the bigger picture in how. Everything connects in relations with the culture. Like I know Taino is a broad term, a broad archaeological term that the modern academic community used to describe a community. But we know, there's a layer of you could say dialects that relates to the Taino. Like, we have Guaraguaorix, we have the Siboney, the Siwayos, So, what's your take on these relationships?
According to my research, the Guaraguaorix from DR and Siguayo and the Siboney and Guanajuato from Cuba, the Siboney was the old Taino. They just spoke a different dialect. It's no different than Spanish, French, and Italian. It's all the same, Latin, but it's the same thing. You know what I mean? It's just different. It's a different branch of it's dialects. What's interesting is that according to my research, they say that the Siboney and Siguayo and Guaraguaorix are native to Dominican Republic and some are in Cuba. But what they don't say is that it's a possibility they were also native to Puerto Rico. Because there's a town, like the Guaraguaorix, for example, there's a town called Morocovi. And apparently the word Morocovi can possibly derive from the people Guaraguaorix, because the spelling is different and the sound, the pronunciation is very similar too. So that's another theory. And another theory is that the Siboney also were possibly native in Puerto Rico, but there's still more research in that, and that's because the word duho. And the Siboney language is their language goes back to the Tongan people from Central America. And according to linguists, the duho is not actually a Taino language. It actually is a Wayuu people, the language Wayuu. And I forgot what it is, Siboney or Siguayo. I'm probably confusing a little bit because they both start with a C. It's one of them. But the duho is, I think it's Siguayo, Siboney, but their language is derived from the Wayuu language, which classic Taino from Puerto Rico is also derived from the Wayuu people. And duho is actually a Wayuu people, and the word duho derives from the Wahido language, the Wahido word, duhu, which means stool. And the Wahido language, the Wahido words, the duhu, comes from another native tribe from South America, I forgot the name, called Tulu, which means bench. So according to archaeologists, they think that since both people come from South America, there was a possibility they must have encountered each other, and maybe one culture derived the word duho
Yeah.
as of like a trait of spirituality in some sort. Okay, you can say.
Yeah. So what I see with what you have here, this isn't an analogy of using correspondences to find the relationships between one opposition towards another. Like, for example, I know you were talking about Ni Taino. You know, let's get into that for a bit.
Okay. To some people, like Jorge Estevez, I think not only Jorge Estevez, but other people too. But I think, in my opinion, I don't think the Tainos refer themselves. I don't think the word Taino is a word to describe them as a tribe. Taino derives from the word Ni Taino, which means my people, it can mean my blood or my relatives. And the reason is that some people think that the word Ni Taino, it doesn't mean my blood or my relatives. But according to the chronicles, I think when Christopher Columbus encountered the Tainos, he had an interpreter. And he asked them, who are you, where you from? And they say, Ni Taino, you know, meaning these are my people, you know. But to some people, they don't think that Ni Taino is they don't think that they call themselves Ni Taino because the Tainos never use the N as the first person. That they call themselves Di Taino because they follow the Locono way, which is the D. They use the D as the first person. I've never seen anything like with a D or any research. I've never seen that term Di Taino. I heard of Daca. It's possible they took the D from the word Daca, like Daca Taino. But it's possible they call themselves Daca. Possibly they say Daca Ni Taino. I am Ni Taino or something. But according to my research, I did some research, and the word Ite to some South American tribes it means red or blood. And in Garifuna, they say Hitao, which is Hitau. And they also use the word Nita, which means my blood. Both words means my blood. And the Locono, they say Ite, which is Ite, which means red or blood. But another word from South American tribe, Ita, A-I-T-A, means blood. Now, if you look at the word Ni Taino, N-I-T-A-I-A-N, you see the word Ita in the middle of the word. So it makes sense that they call themselves my blood relatives. And according to the linguist, the Garifuna linguist, Ruben Reyes, he found that very interesting, and he traced it his definition, Ni Taino or Nita, to be very similar to Ni Taino. And what's another interesting is that in Guajiro language, they use another word called Nu Taino, which means my son. In Guajiro, they say Ni Sani, which means my son. Very similar to Ni Taino, which means my people or my blood relatives. So if you look at it, it makes a lot of sense. You can see the comparisons. You know, it's just a theory. It's not a fact, but it's something that I think everybody should look into, because if you do your research and you look at it, it makes a lot of sense. You know.
Yeah, just so people can get a better understanding of that. If you can, I would like to get on your comment on the YouTube video that was showing the relationship between the Guajiro and the Garifuna. Like, what was your take on that?
Well, I think that was a beautiful video because it shows you that the influence from the Guajiro language and that Garifuna is very, very similar. You know, a good example. I forgot one of the words I did trace, and the Guajiro say the same thing as well as they got. It's Nutani. I give you an example. You spell N-U-T-A-N-I, Guajiro or Nisani. It's very similar, and they both means my son. This is the Guajiro, which means my son. Nutani, and this is Guajiro language. And this is Garifuna, Nisani. So you can see how similar they are. It's the same, you know. I mean, the word or the sound might have changed down the time, but you can see the relation. I think that's a perfect example how the influence of the Wahido and the Garifuna is occurred in the Caribbean, you know, especially in the Taino language too. I love that. I think that's everybody should see that video if you really want to research the language of Tainos or Wahido. You want to try to connect all the dots with the languages. I think you should watch that video. It's a very good video.
This just came into my mind also, just so people can get a clear understanding. If you can explain your take on the interest between the Garifuna and the Taino.
What do you mean, the interest?
Like as far as, you know, the comparison as far as with the words. You know,
with the words? I think, according to my research, the Carib will because Garifuna is the Caribs, you know, they speak Carib, but according to my research, the Caribs will take the Taino wives, and the wives were bilingual, so they would speak Carib to the husband, and they would speak Taino to the son or the kids. So some of the words passed on, you know, and some of the words were mixed with Carib and Taino. Example. In Puerto Rico, we say there's a tiny fish, very tiny, like very mosquito fish. You catch them with a net, and there's a town called Arecibo, which is very known to catching these fish, and it's called seti. And seti is very, very tiny, and you got to catch them with a mosquito net. And Cuba, they call it teti, right? Now, in Garifuna, they say fegi. So you see how the language is. I mean, in Seti, you can spell it S-E-T-I. And Garifuna, they spell it F-E-G-I. So you see the similarities. And what's interesting, too, is that the word for net, when you fish, and there's two, actually there's a few words. You can say capuya, which is a fishing line. The nasa is the net to catch the fish. But the Tainos would use the hammock, as the hammock was also used as a net too. You can imagine that, picture it. Now, in Garifuna, they say for net, we say nasa, but in Garifuna they say neti, which means for net. Now, they also say senti, which is for fishing net. So you see how the word for fish we have in Taino, seti, the tiny fishes, and they use a fishing net called senti. See there, so it makes very interesting if you look at it really clear.
So for the youth that are coming up, what sources of material would you recommend them to read to learn about the language from your studies and research?
I would say look into the Arawak language, like buy books on Arawak language. I have one on it's an Oxford language of the Waina. If you look into the northern languages like Wahido, Dariano, Papoko people, and of course, what the difference is in Carib. So you have Carib in South America, but to archaeologists, to separate the Caribs from the islands in the Caribbean, they call them island Carib. And the people from South America, they just call them Carib. See, in Taino, they call them island Arawak, but in South America, they just call them Arawak because the language is kind of, they changed over time. That's the reason why. But I would say buy books on Arawak, learn about the Wahido language, trace that, and buy books on the Garifuna. And read this book called Perez, if you want to learn about the Taino language. And also read books on, there's a book I've read called The Pre-Columbian of the Language, I believe.
Oh, I think
Cranberry.
It's Languages of the Pre-Columbian Antilles.
That's the one, yes.
Very good material to start.
Yes, yeah, that's one of the ones. That's actually one of the best I recommend in the Arawak one. And also Wahido language, the Wahido book by Ruben Reyes. If you buy that book, you can see the connections, you know. That's what I do. I get the meaning of the word in Taino and I trace it in the Garifuna. And I also try to trace the same meaning in the Wahido language, as well as the the Popoco people as well, and the Toriano people. So that's what's interesting. I'll tell you right, for example, like Gachi means sun. And in Guajiro, they say Gahi, means sun. And to the Taino, Gachi means moon. So Wehi means sun. So you see what I mean? It's different meaning, but they're both celestial objects. You see what I mean? So that's what's interesting.
Well, this has definitely been an eye-opener. I think perhaps in the future we definitely need to do a follow-up. But I believe, in my view, this is an important dialogue to open, to spark interest to our community, to study. But I also believe, most importantly, when we are giving the information to our people, we have to give them the materials to resource themselves, because using the perspective in spirituality, like we came through a rough cycle, of over 500-year cycle of oppression. So
that's right.
So when it comes to this area, this is a very sensitive area. So we have to be as patient and honest with our people as much as possible. So, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your research with us. So with that, I say peace, and we'll see you again soon next time.
I would like to add one more thing real fast.
Right.
I just forgot to mention about the word Taino. In my opinion, like I said, I don't think they call themselves Tainos.
Right.
I believe different people from the island, like the Lucayans, the Caribs, or the Tainos from Borinquen and Quisqueya, I believe they use the term whatever the island they was in. For example, Lucayans call themselves Lucayans because the island they was in, Lucayo, because Luc means people and Cayo means island, so they were the people of the island. So when Christopher Columbus asked who they were, they said we're Lucayan, we're people from the island. So like in Tainos from Puerto Rico, they were Boricuas. We use that term today. And Boricua means native to the island. And Borinquen means violent people of the island. So I think that we didn't, because as far as my understanding, when I asked my great aunts, they never heard of the word Taino, and they're like 90s, they heard of Indio. So if Taino, the word existed down oral tradition, they would have remembered that term Taino. So they remember Boricua, and Boricua is a native word because Bori means worker.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's just my opinion, and it's just my thing.
Yeah, I definitely see what you're talking about. These are just little things that just has to be thoroughly reviewed, in my view.
Exactly,
so I think those were good points that you pointed out. Yeah.
But thanks.
All right. So with that, I say peace.
I think we made an important point. Our ancestors they had a very complex, ideology, and when we are reviewing these concepts, we can't look at it from one side, because it really prevents us from seeing the bigger picture and how all of this connects.
Yeah, and we were very different than the South American tribes. For example, in South America, you have animals in the jungle. You have jaguars.
Right.
I know that our ancestors come from South America, but the deities, we had to adapt to a new environment. So that's where we get the turtle, we get the frog. There was no jaguars there,
Right.
So it's totally different, I think to some archaeologists, even our language was different. They were put us in island Arawaks, because we were totally different than South American tribes.
Right, that's right.
Were just Arawaks, we island Arawaks.
That's right.
So yeah, our culture is very complex. They live a very social, political. They had a different, a unique economical society as well.
Right, that's right. I agree with that.
All right, so I'm here with Rene. So we just left the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and we were commenting on, that, there's not enough representation, when it comes to, especially our youth. To learn about the culture, it just wasn't enough inside. There was plenty of representation of Greek culture and stuff like that in the diaspora. Enough of the African and the Egyptian. But when it comes to our culture, there is not enough presentation. And I know you have something to say about that.
Yeah, it's like if I was to bring my kids in the future to learn about the Taino culture, there's not enough artifacts. And it's only very little to learn from just watching them and trying to explain to them the deities.
Right.
But there's a lot of deities out there. They forgot the deity Atabe. Atabe is not in there. You got Pia Brahma that's there. You have the do holes, and the Taino, the spatula, what they used to use to vomit.
Right.
But they don't have a lot, So but you have to have a lot of Mayan, they have a lot of Aztecs. But when you go and try to learn about the Taino culture, it's very small amount. So,
Yeah, and it's an injustice,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's just not a lot to learn, That's why most of it you just got to go to the books.
Right.
Some of the artifacts is just not here, Or
Right.
maybe in London, possibility.
Right, and we always have to look for another source,
Source.
That's what creates the challenge. Mm-hmm. So this is why, and I'm referencing this again, like I'm really interested in seeing what our elders is going to put out with the Taino Legacies Project. And I mentioned this again because I'm exercising my opinion here, this is very important for our people to be aware of, because they're putting a lot of work in bringing this information out to our community, so that this is history that's being generated here, So these are many themes that we have to keep with an open mind, that our culture never died, it's still present. These are things that our people are being aware of.
I agree. It's not a lot to learn, It's like they forgot about us of some sort,
Right.
They're not important,
Right.
And considering that they still think that we were decimated, So it's like they're more concentrated on the Central America, the Mayans and Aztecs.
Right.
They're still there, But considering that they think that we were decimated, there's not a lot to learn from us, But there is a lot,
Yeah, this all comes with the myth of extinction.
Extinction.
And this is why it's very important that we have to debunk this myth because it's a ridiculous myth. Like, who will come up with such a concept? Like, come on.
It's that colonialism.
It's
mindset.
It's that colonial mentality.
Yeah, that's the mindset.
Yeah.
It's I also blame the educational system, of course.
Right.
These guys, they get their PhDs, but it's like they're not putting too much research on Taino culture.
Yeah.
That's why I would like to probably get a field on anthropology and and try to study more about Taino culture. I mean, we got a lot of research on African and European. Taino culture is so minuscule.
Right.
It's not. A lot of people don't know who they are.
There's not enough of an emphasis.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
That's very key.
They only have the basics.
Right.
Only the fundamentals for this.
Right.
They don't have the big picture yet.
Right.
And that's what we're doing. That's what we're trying to do right now.
Right. Yeah, so with that, and for the youth, I hope, this sparks your mind to pursue your culture and your spirituality and to learn about your heritage. And with that, we say peace and we'll see you next time. We're here in the restaurant in El Caribe. We made a good point. We were talking about our people here in the States or the city having a disconnection with the culture. I think that's a really important point. Because there is a disconnection. Like I myself, I grew up in the city. And I also understand the challenges that we have. We're trying to connect something that we lost touch with. Growing up in the city, you find that there's a disconnection with our reconnecting with our roots.
I agree. I was born in Brooklyn too, and I think actually my parents were teaching me about my culture. A lot of people don't have that privilege because they their parents sometimes are born here, and they get used to that. They get used to being mostly Americans, and they forget about who they actually really are. But my mother was born in Puerto Rico, and my father, he was born here, but he was raised in Puerto Rico. And they taught me what my culture was, and I actually heard them a lot. And I thank them so much. And the good thing is that I was raised in the Spanish area, where I lived at. So a lot of people, a good example is most people, like for example, I can't say I do, but I don't speak much Spanish, I try to because I'm trying, I know a little bit, I can read it too, but at least I'm trying to reconnect with my culture. It's the same thing with trying to learn Taino. I'm trying to reconnect with my culture. Like you said, it's an old separation. There's a separation.
Yeah, definitely there is.
There's a separation. So I think it's good to trace where you come from. It's important because it makes it develops who you really are. If you do, you get to understand yourself more.
Like if you look like how I grew up, like I didn't have the same benefits. Because my family's from DR. I believe my father was from Puerto Plata. I can't recall where my mother was from, but my family's from DR. So, like they didn't speak to me about the culture. What I learned is from doing my own studies. I had an interest in reading. As I learned later on, I have an aunt from my mother's side. She's conscious about her indigeneity. But I only started coming to learn this later as I'm doing my own research and studies. So not all of us have the benefit.
Right.
So this is just something that just throw out there just for the youth to understand. It's not always a privilege, but now we have the information out there, so we have to take advantage. The information that's being put out. So don't just sit down and be a television junkie. Do the research, learn your culture, reconnect with your roots. And with that,
I agree. Learn where you come from. There's a saying, in order to know where you're going, you gotta know where you've been.
Exactly.
I agree.
Like that said, the further back you can review, the archives, you'll be able to have a better understanding of the current situation. So with that, until next time. Now we. All right.